Okay, my name is Malcolm McCormick, and I am interviewing my grandparents, Bob and Judy Winters. I was going to call you Nana and Papa. um, we are at their house, and it is May 28th. How old were you when Kennedy was assassinated in 1963?
I was 20.
I was 28.
Okay. Where were you when you heard about the assassination?
I was in college. I was on my way to a class, and it was a cold November day in Minnesota. And it's a moment I'll never forget. You know, it was we, all the kids were saying Kennedy's been shot, and we all said, "Oh, but he isn't dead, is he?" Um, kind of hoping it was just maybe wounded. But then we heard, then I got to my class, and then it was formally announced that he had been killed.
I was at Point Magoo, nearby here. I was in the Navy at the time. I was a lieutenant. And there were a group of us sitting around. I think it must have been after lunch or something, but we were kind of passing the time away, just chatting when we heard. And we at Point Magoo, you had, at that time, or still, you had access to a lot of communications, not just the radio or the TV, but all kinds of communications that the ordinary people didn't have. So we knew what was going on right away. And it was shocking, of course. But some of us who didn't like Kennedy and didn't think he was killed said, "Oh, well, I suppose this will assure that he's going to get elected next time around." The next day
Sympathy vote.
we were really sorry we said that kind of thing.
Yeah.
How did it affect you?
Oh, it was very sad. I can remember my friends and I were all sitting and watching all the, events unfold. Whole, um, the whole funeral and the procession, and it was really sad. Kennedy's children were little kids, real cute little kids, and his wife was so beautiful, and it was just, I think the whole country was just like really affected. I mean, it was very sad.
So did the way that other people react to his death affect your opinion?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Oh, absolutely. This was, I can't remember, I guess there was color TV at that time, but it wasn't predominant. But this was the first time that we had 24-hour news coverage of an event, and it transpired Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, 24-hour news coverage. And the most prominent newscasters of the time were a couple named Huntley and Brinkley. And Huntley and Brinkley carried this whole thing off. And Brinkley made a real interesting quote somewhere in this evolution. We were all glued to the television set for the whole weekend. Everyone was. The whole country was glued to their television sets, watching what was transpiring. The funeral, the collection of the body, the funeral later on, the assassination of the assassinator, the arrest of him first of all, and then the assassination by Jack Ruby. And anyway, Brinkley said something. He says, "Isn't it terrible that all this transpired by some young guy with a mail order gun?"
Mm-hmm. Who do you think was responsible for the assassination, and what do you think their motive was?
Well, Lee Harvey Oswald was the man they arrested.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, he could never testify because he was assassinated about a day later himself. But he had spent time in Russia, which we were in the middle of the Cold War, and he was indoctrinated with their beliefs. So that's it. He was sort of a Russian agent.
I read a number of reports and books about this thing. And there's no doubt in my mind it was the sole perpetrator, Lee Harvey Oswald. There's been a lot of conspiracy theories. There's been, and there still are. There's still a number of people who don't believe it. They don't believe it vehemently, but I think they're wrong. And I agree with the Warren Commission, which was the commission that. If you want to read this summertime, when you have nothing else to do, Macklin, read Stephen King's book, 1963.
Okay.
It's about the assassination. It's a fantasy, but it's about the assassination. The historical facts that he presents are pretty correct. So,
Do you have it?
yes.
Okay, I'll borrow it from you. Okay, moving on.
You're going to have to edit a lot of this, aren't you?
No, I'm just gonna keep it. Did you serve in the Vietnam War, or do you know anyone who did?
I was in the Navy during the Vietnam War. I visited Vietnam. I wasn't actually shooting anybody at the time. I was in Japan at the time with Judy, actually.
Mhm.
But I had occasion a couple of times to go to Vietnam to do some stuff. So
Did you ever watch news reports about Vietnam on television?
No, we didn't have American television.
Oh,
We were in Japan. It was just Japanese TV.
oh.
So we were really away from television for 3 years. Kind of nice. Anyway, of course, we followed the story. I mean, we had radio, Armed Forces radio.
yeah, we had a newspaper,
Yeah.
and we had in terms of television.
Okay, I'm gonna ask you about your reactions to the following ones.
Well, wait.
Oh, okay.
You know, now we did see it on television when he was assassinated. Or you're talking about the Vietnam War?
Yeah.
Okay.
We've moved on in about
Yeah.
3 years.
Okay. Yep. But in that time, we had met and got married, and you know.
Okay. So I'm gonna give you time to answer or give reactions or opinions to the following little
Okay.
bits. So, what were your reactions to the anti-war movement?
Well, we were part of the Navy, so I wasn't at all enthused about the anti-war movement. I could see where people resented being drafted and having to serve, maybe be killed, and they had just kind of been enslaved. They had to go over there, you know. And I could see that, and I thought a lot of parents would feel really so worried and so upset about seeing these young people having to be endangered. But as a Navy wife, no, I wasn't real enthused about the anti-war movement. I don't know how you felt about it.
Well, initially I thought they were a bunch of traitors. You know, but that was an initial gut reaction, and I changed my mind over the months and years. This was a difficult time. We fought what up to that time was the longest war in American history, and we did it all with draftees. You know, we had professional soldiers and sailors like me, but we fought the war with draftees. You know, mostly 17, 18-year-old kids that weren't smart enough to get a deferment and got packed off to war. And it wasn't like, you know, the wars we were engaged in the last 10 years or so is fought by volunteers, and it's a whole different deal. When you've got draftees being brought home in body bags, it impacts you a whole differently than it does with volunteers.
Mm-hmm.
We admire the volunteers, we revere them, but they weren't picked up off the streets and then made to go there, and that's what the situation was in Vietnam. In terms of how we staffed ourselves, it was we didn't even call up the reserves or the National Guard for Vietnam. We fought the war with a few volunteers and with a lot of draftees. So it was our positions on the anti-war demonstrators evolved. I went from thinking they were traitors to thinking maybe they got the right idea, and maybe I'm the wrong.
Mm-hmm. So you weren't like directly involved in the movement, like opposing or?
No, we didn't have an opportunity to do that. Most of the time, I was first of all, we were in Japan until 1969, and then we were in New Orleans, and I was still in the Navy then.
And we got married, we had 2 little kids.
Yeah.
Jenny and Ann were
No.
born over there in Japan.
Oh.
So, I mean, I was a little busy.
Yeah.
I didn't have time to think about it, really.
And I guess I got used to them, and I came to sympathize with them a little bit, and as did most of the people I knew, and the professional people in the Navy. At least didn't hate them anymore. They began to think that maybe they got a good point.
If you had the opportunity to get involved with the movement, would you have, or would you just still?
No, I would not have. No,
I
of
don't
course not.
think so.
Okay.
Because I wasn't, my feelings about the Vietnam War were mixed. It was something, it was a job I felt that most of the time that I felt we had to do. I just didn't approve of the way we went about it, so.
What was your reaction to the civil rights movement?
Well, that was when I was still in college, when Martin Luther King was leading the big marches. And so I heard some of his speeches, and I thought it was kind of exciting. I lived in a part of the country that didn't have very many blacks, so it wasn't something that really touched me very close. But he was such an eloquent speaker. It was thrilling to hear him speak. And even now when I see old films of him giving his speeches, it just gives me goosebumps. He was just such a great leader.
Yeah, he was probably the prominent hero of the 20th century. I can't think of who else I would put ahead of him in the 20th century. I mean, we've had certainly historical figures that surpassed him in heroism and in mission and lots of different ways. But in my lifetime, he was a prominent one. I don't know that I recognized him as that at the time, though. You know, I was out in California. You know, this was all taking place in Mississippi and Alabama. I knew those places. I'd driven through them, and I knew what conditions were like there. And I admired and marveled at the courage of the young men and women that participated in those marches, because it took a lot of courage. It was a very hostile environment at that time in those states. But I would not have been able to. I was in the Navy. You know, I wasn't able to go back there and participate in those things. And everyone would have thought, at the time, would have thought I was nuts if I had. So,
Did you actually see like racism and like violent acts
No.
happen, or?
no.
Well,
I never did.
you had noticed racism when you were in the South.
Oh, of course. The South was, the South is different today, a lot different. But when I journeyed to the South in the late 50s and early 60s, it was not a nice place for anybody that wasn't part of the ruling class. Frankly, the poor whites didn't do so well either. But it was not a pleasant place to travel through, even as a lily white American, and certainly if you were black, it was an awful place.
When
to
he
be.
was first in the Navy, they sent him to Pensacola, Florida, and movie theaters were segregated. Blacks had to sit up in the balcony, and they couldn't. They had different drinking fountains, different bathrooms. You know, it was.
And we had black sailors. We had black officers. We had black officers going through flight training. I don't know how they survived. I mean, they couldn't very well go off the base. Mm-hmm. If they had a wife and children, they couldn't find any place to live. It was a terrible thing. You know.
What were your reactions to equal rights for women?
I thought it was just inevitable. I didn't. How can you be against that? I wasn't then. I was certainly supportive of it then. I said, "Oh, that's a good idea. Why didn't we do this before?" That was my reaction.
Yeah, me too.
Were there any instances where where you saw something and you really felt like this is a thing that going along with the equal rights for women?
What do you mean?
Like, has there been anything that just kind of made you think like there needs to be equal rights for women like immediately?
In no specific instance, I just thought it was a good idea and that the time was come. And I guess, in some ways, I was surprised that it was an issue because I thought they already had equal rights. I didn't know that there was, I didn't understand that there was discrimination against women. And it took me probably some convincing to think that there might have been a
Well,
problem.
as a woman, I can tell you that when I was young, opportunities were very limited for girls. You were expected to get married when you were pretty young, and even after, fortunately, I was able to go to college. I've got my degree, but my opportunities for work were limited. I mean, I could be a teacher, I could be a nurse, or I could be maybe a social worker. And, or for the girls that didn't go to college, they could be secretaries. And that was it, or a beautician, I guess, would be another career. But it was very limited. There were very few women that went into, say, law school or medical school or dental school or business school to get an advanced degree in business. So, I mean, I really felt like my life was pretty well laid out. I was a good student, so I went to school. I really enjoyed it. I had a good time. Got my degree, got a teaching job, and then I hoped to find Prince Charming right away and get married. And then I really didn't plan on doing anything other than being a housewife and a mother. That was it. I really wasn't thinking in terms of a long career.
What were your thoughts on the hippie movement?
Well, we were a little before that time. Didn't get involved with the hippie movement. Thought they were pretty outrageous and
Pretty radical.
pretty radical. And
Psychedelic.
yeah, San Francisco, Haight-Ashbury,
They kind of merged with the Vietnam protesters.
Yeah,
They
absolutely.
the hippie became the flower children and stuff.
Yeah, but we were just we're young just a little bit before that time, so.
No, we were not. None of our contemporaries would have been hippies. We were too young, too old for that.
However, one night we went to a Halloween costume party and we were dressed up like hippies.
That was
That was fun.
Yeah.
But anyway, it was kind of funny.
we were too old for that.
Just a few years, yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah, all you need to do is be about 5 years older, and you're too old. So.
That makes sense. What event from the 1960s had the most effect on you?
Getting married. How about you?
Well, I guess the Vietnam War. That was a life changer for me. But it was preceded by the election of Johnson over. Yeah, it was preceded by things happened rapidly. Kennedy's assassination, '63. Johnson immediately taking over. The follow-on election in '64 against Goldwater, the first time we ever heard of a conservative. And people were afraid. The main reason they voted against Goldwater was that they felt that if Goldwater was elected, he was going to get us into a real bad war in Vietnam. Now it's just kind of a messy war. And then, of course, it got to be a messy war anyway. It got to be a real bad war under Johnson, too. It just evolved that way. But in fact, about a year after the election, one of the jokes going around was, they told me if I voted for Goldwater, would have 600,000 American troops in Vietnam. And I voted for Goldwater, and sure enough, we now have 600,000 troops in Vietnam.
Papa, you already said Martin Luther King, but is there anyone else from the 1960s like that you most admire, like a leader, and then you can say it.
I think Johnson. I mean, I detested Johnson for most of his presidency, but he did some wonderful things. In retrospect, I think he was one of our best presidents.
Oh, I disagree completely.
Yeah.
Why?
He got us all involved in this great society. He was going to end poverty. There's more poverty now than there's ever been. Our country is practically bankrupt from all the big programs, trillions of dollars wasted. And it was just, he was a big government guy, and I completely disagree with everything he stood for.
Well, except I would agree with most of what you say, except for the civil rights movement. Johnson
Yeah, he did.
Johnson
I agree
cemented
with that.
and did the civil rights movement. Without his initiatives, it would never have happened.
Yeah. And that was
That's why I
interesting
admired
because
him.
he was from the South.
That's what, and he was from the South. But he was a powerful politician, and he was I think he would have done some really good things had it not been for the Vietnam War, which ended up destroying him.
Yeah, he wound up kind of just not wanting to run again.
Well, he couldn't. He was going to lose, and it was all because of the Vietnam War, and deservedly so. He made a terrible mistake by pursuing that. So.
Well, obviously Johnson doesn't answer the question for you, but who did you admire, like a big leader, or just anyone?
I don't know who I admired. I wasn't thinking about politics much at that time. I really wasn't. I mean, I would go and vote, but I wasn't real enthralled with anybody. I just had my mind on other things. I was just busy, you know.
Now that you have like more time to like think about it and stuff, is there anyone who you can admire now?
From the 60s?
Yes.
There were some leaders in the women's movement.
Oh, they were a bunch
But
of
most of them
kooks.
were kind of kooky,
Yeah.
unfortunately, and they were just kind of noisy. So I would have to. I can't think of. The women's movement flowered in the '60s, but
I'll tell you somebody that I admire from the 60s is Reverend Billy Graham.
okay, good choice.
He went
good
all
choice.
over the world and very inspirational. People all over the world love that man.
Yeah.
He's still alive, but he's very, very frail. And that would be one person I could think of. But there might have been people in entertainment that I, if I really thought about it, might come to mind, but I wasn't paying much attention to politics.
Oh, just before I forget to ask the question, it's back about the war. And do you feel like the war changed you from like how you acted and how your personality was before the war to how it is now?
No.
No, I don't think so. No, I don't think so.
Going back again.
Mhm.
What was your favorite music group?
Beatles.
Well,
Four Freshmen.
probably something like that. But
Limelighters.
Yeah, probably the Limelighters or some folk music thing. I wasn't, looking back, I would prefer the Beatles, but at the time, I would probably have.
Oh, we
picked,
like the Limelighters.
I would have probably picked the Kingston Trio or
Yeah.
the Limelighters or one of those folk because they were funny and they were light music and they were it was just good music.
songs that everybody,
Yeah.
you knew all the words.
Yeah.
I still know all those words.
You should sing to us.
But, but it took me many years before I began to admire the Beatles or Elvis Presley, for that matter.
Oh, Elvis. Yeah, there you
Yeah,
go.
yeah. He was probably the most prominent entertainer at the time. I
He's
was-
still good.
Do you have a favorite humorous memory from the 1960s?
No,
Humorous memory.
I don't know. Can't think of anything.
Oh, no, I can't either. Not offhand. You think about these things later.
Yeah. Then is there a sad memory that has stuck with you?
We're still in the 60s.
Mm-hmm.
Well, a sad memory would be when Kennedy was shot. A happy memory from the 60s, a few years later, was when the astronauts landed on the moon.
Mm-hmm.
And that was real exciting. Of course, we were in Japan. We didn't get to watch it on
Well,
TV.
we actually did watch it on TV.
Oh, did we?
But it was with a little subtitles.
Japanese.
It was all in Japanese language. So you had to kind of interpret what was going on.
But that was a happy memory, made you real proud. Everybody felt so strongly that we were the powerful country in control and
Mm-hmm.
doing great
That was
things.
very exciting.
Your picture changed.
Oh, right.
We have to be on.
Going off of the space thing, how did you feel about the space thing initially, and then did you expect it to work? Like, what were your expectations on getting to space, and were you, like, excited for it?
Yeah. Excited.
Well,
I thought it was going to work. I didn't know how. I still don't understand, how they did it, but
I knew it was going to work because I spent 3 years at Point Magoo and involved in this, to some degree, in the space thing. For instance, I flew on a mission where we actually, located the space capsules that landed in the Pacific. So,
Mhm.
but I'd been thoroughly aware of what was going on and thoroughly briefed on it on a monthly basis for 3 years. So I knew it was going to work.
Mm-hmm. So you were somewhat involved.
Oh yeah, I was involved in the space mission, among other things. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Do you view the 1960s as a good time or a bad time in history?
Oh, that's an interesting question.
a turbulent time. And I think, in a way, it was an exciting time, but it was a lot of sadness with that war. A lot of sadness. So many young people killed. A lot of families just completely torn up. So overall, I'd say it was kind of. Oh, and then when the students were rioting in the cities, and police had to shoot guns at them to get them to stop, and it was exciting, but
Was it more of like a time of change?
big changes and sadness.
Mhm.
I don't. I mean, personally, it wasn't a sad time for us because we had these cute little babies, and we're so busy with that. But when I think of what was going on in the cities and everything, it was a sad time.
But it was also a prosperous time for most of
Yeah.
America. And
Oh,
there were major changes going on, but I think most people were upbeat.
Mhm.
And even with the Vietnam or the Civil Rights Movement, lots of turmoil. Those two things are the most prominent, but still, most people were upbeat about the future, and there was a time of prosperity. The whole '60s. I don't think there was a time in the '60s that there was high unemployment, for instance.
Yeah.
Everyone was expecting to live better than their parents. And,
Anybody that wanted a job could get one.
Oh, yeah.
Mm.
And anybody that wanted to get rich and had the capability was going to get rich. So there's that type of attitude and that type of accomplishment.
What impact or influence did the 1960s have on our country?
Well, both of those events were game changers. The civil rights and then the Vietnam War. You know, we still talk about the Vietnam War. We still talk about the civil rights movement. So those were turning points in the 20th century, and they happened. I think as much as anything else in the 20th century, those two things were game changers. As compared to the Great Depression or the World War II, these were also. These were two big events. So.
How did your experiences in the 1960s affect your attitudes about life today?
I don't know. I think I've grown out of the 1960s. If I were younger, I would probably give you a different view. If I was 20 years younger, maybe the 1960s would have had a bigger impact on the way I am today. This is all. I've had a long time to grow out of the 60s.
Yeah. Do you think, were you expecting as much change to be happening, like from the 60s to now, like with technology advancing so quickly?
Oh, yeah.
Did you expect all this
No.
change so fast?
No, I didn't. When I was a little kid, I can remember hearing that there was going to be an oven that you could put a potato in and it would be all baked in 4 minutes. And big deal, it's a microwave oven. But we didn't have them when I was little. And I thought, no way, that could never work. I mean, that's just a small example, but now, it was a few years later, everybody's got a microwave. I mean, it's no big deal. But, of course, then the computers. When we first started our business, people's idea of a computer was something that would maybe be the size of a small room. And they were worried about blowing up. It was, when the personal computers came into being, that was such a major breakthrough. And
I guess I expected in the 60s that things would keep progressing in bigger jumps, bigger leaps. But I couldn't have predicted how that would come about. The big change technologically in the 60s was to go from vacuum tubes in stereos, for instance, to transistors. And then from there, we had no concept of what eventually became
sorry.
computers.
It's talking. Excuse me. Sorry, you can go on now.
That's right. But the things that we have today, I would not have anticipated in the 60s. But I was optimistic that things were going to get progressively better and have increasingly rapid change. So.
Are there any ending statements you want to say about the 1960s, or did you cover it?
I think we covered it.
Yeah.
But the 1960s was a time when I was young and strong. And I had very optimistic, and I was a family was coming along, and I had every reason to be happy, and I was. And I still am, but it was a time of extreme optimism from my standpoint.
I would agree. Yeah.
Well, I guess that covers it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yay.